Hi, everyone. If you were here from the previous session, feel free to come back. We're going to keep talking about responsible sourcing and responsible business, and there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. So thank you for joining today's session on the benefits of sustainable retail. Our goal will be to discuss the importance and urgency of sustainability in business, focusing on something very important, which is ethical supply chains. My name is Francisca Sassetti, and I'm a responsible sourcing consultant at SEDEX. I work with organizations of all sizes and industries to help them achieve their sustainability goals. And my area of expertise is the human rights, forced labor area. Please feel free to scan the QR code if you want to have some more information or get in touch. And just for our session today, we're going to be having just a conversation about, first, we're going to talk about a bit about SEDEX, what we do. Second, we're going to get into sustainability in business, what it is, how it has changed, where we are now, and what is driving it today. Then we're going to be deep diving into the challenges and opportunities for small businesses and large businesses as well in this area, and end up with some top tips of what you can do right now in your business. And there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, around 20 minutes or so. So just to have an open conversation, and I really welcome your engagement. So today I'm here representing SEDEX. Some of you might know us quite well. For some of you might be quite new. Some of you might have heard about it. So we work in the responsible business area. And our goal is to supply to data-driven insights across different tools and services, and engage with companies of all sizes and our community to improve the ESG, or the environmental, social, and governance factors. And a big part of SEDEX is suppliers, as it is in the name. SEDEX means supplier, has supplier in the name, which means smaller companies and their suppliers are at the heart and the core of everything that we do. Just essentially, SEDEX, we are a membership organization, and we are driven by companies. We have over 66,000 members around the world, and we provide tools and services for ethical supply chain management. And like I said, we go from large corporations to very small businesses, small farmers here in the UK as well. And to date, we have improved the working conditions of 33 million workers worldwide, in 170 countries approximately, which is half of the UK population. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. We also have a global presence in about 7 countries, and we have over 200 staff. Some of our staff is here today as well, and we cover a multitude of languages. So what is the core of SEDEX? SEDEX is a bit like a platform. It connects buyers with supplier organizations and allows you to share information. It's a bit like a LinkedIn. Once you connect with companies, you can then see each other's information, like audit results, self-assessment questionnaire about what policies they have, the kind of products that they sell, the kind of risks that are associated with the product. So it's a bit how it works. So it's about managing your relationships, but also everyone that is part of SEDEX is part of a big community where we share and enable learning. These are just some of the brands that we work with. And I guess if you go to our website, you can see many, many more as well. And now into what is sustainability in business. Some of you are surely very familiar or have some ideas. But let me start telling you what sustainability in business is not. It is not having a percentage of your products made from recycled materials. It is not just having special certifications, donating loads of money to charities. It's not just carbon offsetting, making a product and then just planting trees to compensate for something. And it's not just about making empty commitments on your website. True sustainability in business, and I realize, okay, that was supposed to say people, planet, and society. True sustainability in business requires an holistic approach. And we might have heard this word a lot, but sustainability means that there cannot be sustainability unless all components are considered, people and planet equally. We cannot expect also businesses to embrace sustainability purely out of their moral responsibility or kindness. It's about feeding families, investing in people's education. There are many businesses here that are from decades and generations of families. So the way we can make sure they are sustainable is by respecting employees' rights to decent working conditions, to fair wages, investing in people, understanding environmental impacts, and then, which is only possible if there's some sort of economic benefit to businesses to invest in sustainability. Sustainability in business also means using an approach that puts truly the meaning of being ethical at the core of what we do, and our relationships with those that are part of our business and that are mostly impacted by our business. Whether that is customers, suppliers, your business partners. And there are two ways to do it, or to consider it. The first is internal, like an inward. Check how you are impacting your employees, local communities around you, and environment. Yes, that is a stakeholder, and it's one of your stakeholders as well. And an external one, the outwards one, is around your product life cycle linked to circularity, and also your supply chain. Sustainability in business has changed a lot over the years. So just to briefly explain to you, initially, the first time we started talking about sustainability 20 years ago, it was more in a philanthropic sense. There was corporate volunteering, there was lots of donations. Then we moved into something that is more like a compliance focus. We started to see some laws coming and forcing large businesses to comply with them. And then we moved into something more like an optimization phase, where business said, wait a minute, can I go beyond compliance? Can I just go minimum requirements? Can I understand the true impacts and the big risks to my business? Environmental and human rights risks. And then we get to where we are today, where we have a more holistic focus, which means businesses are thinking about how sustainability can be part of their business model, not just as a nice to have, not as just this is another nice thing we do on top of everything we do. This is part of our core identity. This is part of our offering and our identity and who we are as a business. I want to go through some of who is pushing for the more holistic sustainability that we're seeing. So we have investors investing in large corporations who now see sustainable investing as a new normal. We have governments, international standards, regional bodies such as the EU, who are now setting standards and new laws. You might have seen some of them. We have also businesses themselves. We have civil society, trade unions, and customers and your employees. Talking about your customers for a second. Are customers really asking for more ethical products? This is something we see a lot. Oh, people want to see more, but let's look at some data. So what we're seeing is that we estimate there's a £60 billion green growth value to the UK economy by 2050 if businesses start to invest in this area. We also see there's about 87% of consumers in a recent survey demanding companies to act now on sustainability. And even in terms of the people that you hire and the people you want to work for you, there's lots of recent studies show that the second most important factor when choosing someone you want to work with or work for, they seek for sustainability practices, particularly with the younger generations. And there's definitely something that I've done myself as I entered the job market. Now onto something very important. In order to have a responsible and ethical business, we need an ethical supply chain, which is a big part of what I want to talk to you today. What does it mean to have an ethical supply chain? It means that all the expectations you have, that you work with people with integrity, people with values, people that don't exploit others, they pay fairly, they don't produce enormous amounts of waste or use hazardous chemicals, that there's accountability and expectations that are cascaded down across who you directly source from, and then who your suppliers work with as well. And what you can see here is that it gets trickier as you get down to who are the lower tiers of the supply chain, meaning your suppliers. Also because that's where the highest risk for human rights occur. Let's say, for example, you are a fashion company, a small fashion company that makes baby clothes, and your direct suppliers provide you with the clothes, let's say, but then the big risk will be who are the cotton suppliers to your supplier. 1 in every 5 cotton products in the world are made with forced labor. And so how are you understanding and mapping the risk in your supply chain is a huge part of having an ethical supply chain. Another big force is legislation. You know, legislation can be a bit of a burden for businesses, but at the same time, they also offer some interesting opportunities to rethink the way we do things. The most recent examples in the UK is the UK Modern Slavery Act that some of us might be familiar with. So companies have to submit a report on what they're doing to tackle modern slavery in their supply chain. Although this only applies to large companies, we also start to see other laws that will start to affect and impact other businesses, such as, for example, the UK plastics packaging tax that came into force in April this year. This means that every business that is importing more than 10 tons of plastic or manufacturing them into the UK will need to pay £200 per ton of plastic that has less than 30% of recycled contents. This means that if you are working with a big business that uses that kind of packaging, you have to conduct due diligence to support the buyer that works with you, the buyer company. Or yourself, you might have to pay tax as well. And to avoid being fined, you need to start understanding, anticipating some of these laws and what the requirements are. Another law that came out recently is the UK Green Claims Code. You might have seen it on the news as the greenwashing law. So essentially, this holds businesses accountable for any environmental claims they make that are not truthful about their own products, such as percentages of recycled material, such as being sustainable, fair wages. And we've seen some of those on the news, which I'm not going to mention now. And there's also the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which is very, very, very big. It will have a huge impact for all businesses operating within the European Union. So we talked about what SEDEX, who we are as SEDEX, and what we do to support businesses. We also talked about what sustainability in business is and what the biggest drivers for it now. Are for it now. So the different laws, the customer side. And now I want to talk to you about what are the challenges that we see for businesses today, and then the opportunities as well. So what challenges are we facing today? And this is from conversations we had with our members, with small suppliers, SMEs, farmers, and large corporations. The first one is lack of supply chain visibility, particularly at the lower tier, so your suppliers. So the smaller part of the diagram we saw. If you don't have visibility, you don't know what's coming for you. You don't know if you're sourcing exploitation of people. You don't know if you're sourcing monumental waste. You don't know if you're sourcing a product that has hazardous chemicals that are dangerous or they have a huge environmental impact. So you just don't know. And if you don't know, you can only manage what you know. The second big challenge is supply chain disruption. For some of you more than others, you might have experienced some of this disruption because of the aftermath of a very long pandemic, conflict and political crisis, and so many other factors. Another challenge we're seeing is the cost of the increase of cost of living, high inflation, and the upcoming recession in the first quarter next year. And we know this will impact purchasing power, and it will affect a lot of businesses here as well. Another challenge is the quick switch to online shopping and retailing experiences. For a lot of businesses that relied on a physical presence, this just completely changes the game. Another challenge is the competing internal priorities. We know there's so much businesses have to do, so many pressures they have to respond to. So now we still have to think about sustainability. Great. Now we have to invest in this. Another challenge is that some businesses here operate or source from regions that are just very challenging for human rights, in the sense that those governments don't have the same standards for labor conditions, for health and safety that we have in UK, for example. And even in UK, we've seen on the news how it can also happen, that people are not paid what they should, that people don't work with the protective equipment they should have, and that people can still be exploited in some industries. So we know. Now imagine going to a region where the government has very weak laws, people don't have right to adequate rest, and the environmental impacts are just absolutely massive, much worse than what we feel in the UK in terms of droughts and floods. Another challenge is around the increasing regulation and the different laws, which can represent fines, criminal offenses for businesses, and also reputational damages. Another challenge comes from all the different stakeholders, the people we work with, our customers, our business partners, our suppliers, having increasing expectations of what we should do. And finally, greenwashing and social washing, which is the not being truthful about social issues, which is linked to what you communicate and how you communicate it. So these are just some headlines that you might have seen. You might have seen similar ones recently. But what we can see, and I guess the theme here is that there's multiple things business can be subject to. That is legal action, greenwashing claims. They can be sued by their own workers and trade unions. They can have their products seized. And for example, recently, there's been lots of products seized at the US border, and also even claims for the investigation over working conditions in the UK. And what are we here to say? We're not here to name and shame. We're here to help businesses prepare for some of these things, so you're not caught off guard. So now let's get into some of the opportunities that we think businesses can explore from sustainable practices and initiatives. So a huge opportunity for businesses in terms of sustainability is mapping your supply chain in high-risk areas. Once you know what's out there and start moving downwards into your supply chain, you can understand what are the most relevant risks and environmental factors, for example, whether that was waste, emissions, what are the most salient labor rights that you should be, that are more important to your business, for example. That can be working hours, can be regular employment. It might be that you work with businesses that have a lot of subcontracting, for example, practices, which are high risk for social issues and exploitation. Then another opportunity is that you can create resilience. If you have more sustainable practices in your business, you can start to prepare for some of these issues before they affect you. And this can obviously reduce costs. Another opportunity, and we've seen this, and it's something we've heard for a long time, is the quality versus quantity. We know this is not always possible for all businesses, but we also see that there's a trend for consumers to start to invest in higher quality products and pay a higher price if they know things will last longer as well. Another opportunity and to invest in sustainability is adapting to the new normal. We see that online shopping experiences are increasingly online. But how do we do this in a way that we craft a digital space where our customers and business partners can come and they feel like they know exactly what our identity is knowing that we have a distinct brand and identity, given how crowded the online space already is. So there's a huge opportunity here, cuts cost and some of your expenses as well. Another opportunity of sustainability is just being part of the conversation, being honest with your peers about the struggles you have and this has happened to me when I work with other organizations. This is something I've seen happening, which is we're struggling with this in organization. How are you dealing with this? So that kind of peer-to-peer knowledge sharing is just really, really important. Hence, at SEDEX, we have a community for that. And then going beyond compliance. So when you make commitments, show you're making progress. It's not just about making empty promises. You need to deliver on those. And also being always truthful and transparent about any claims you make. So you're not doing greenwashing and you're not breaking the trust of the people who believe in your brand and buy from you. So we talked about the challenges and opportunities for why we should invest in sustainability in our business. Now, how do we get started? What do we do? And so essentially, this is the SEDEX approach to responsible sourcing. It has 7 steps. They are based on the UN guiding principles and other guidelines, but they are designed to support businesses across every stage of their responsible sourcing journey. And I guess maybe we just can go back to the example we were saying about the fashion company, for example, the baby clothes fashion company. So if we were to start with awareness and preparation, what does this mean? This means starting to understand what are some of the good practices you already have and where do you want to go next. So raise some awareness of what other businesses with similar size, similar industry are doing as well, and how you can then invest in those good practices and just create a plan. Then what you would do is that you define and commit to some goals, right? So let's say this is where we are now. What do we want to be in 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, right? What would a sustainable business or a business as sustainable look like? Does it mean that, for example, we want to have our entire collection to be eco-friendly, to have green certifications? whatever those might be. Does that mean that we want to make sure our products are carbon neutral? Maybe we want to make sure that we have living wage in our supply chain. So making some clear commitments, and this is also something that you should have in terms of your own policies. Whatever you will hold the people working with you, your suppliers against, you need to hold yourself accountable to first. So this happens through, for example, having an environmental policy, for example, or sustainability policy or statement, with some of the expectations for how you running your business and your own operations, and then what expectations then you set and lay out for your suppliers and the people who work with them. The third step is then is embed and governance. This means who within the organization is going to take charge of all the sustainable initiatives, just to make sure that whatever you're doing, that you have someone who's taking ownership, who's taking things forward, who is the ally within the organization. Because we know one of the challenges for businesses is sometimes you have one person alone fighting to make the case for being more sustainable, when maybe there needs to be, you need to show your colleagues and the other people in your business why this is important, why this will bring value to their own roles, why this will bring value to what you do. Then the fourth step here, going back to the example of the fashion company, is assess risks and impacts. So if you are a fashion company, a small retailer, let's say, the way to understand your risks is to say, okay, so these are the commodities or the products we source. And then to make our t-shirts or to make our products or our shoes, this is the materials we get. And then start asking questions. What countries do they come from? What are the risks associated in those countries? What are the high risk, among these commodities are highest risk for, let's say, any human rights issues? And so then you can start conducting some due diligence. For example, asking your suppliers, have you been audited recently? Are your facilities audited for social issues and environment? Do you have any other environmental certifications, for example? And are you measuring the use of water, your emissions in some way? And then this helps you to start build a picture of what your business impact is as well. Because your impact must consider, as I mentioned, everything beyond your own operations, everything that is your suppliers, everything that is used to make your products or to support with your services needs to be considered when talking about sustainability. Then another step here will be to implement and act. If you identify things you want to do, and you've done an assessment, and you know some of the risks, this is a time where you put an action plan in place, and we say, okay, we need to make sure that we audit, let's say, our shoemaker in Portugal, which is where I'm come from, for example. We need to make sure that they have an audit, or they need to tell us if they had one recently, and then from those results, we can then conduct actions. Maybe you want to work closely with those suppliers if you know they might be struggling, if you know they might be more, there's a higher risk for certain issues to occur. Another step very important is monitor and evaluation. So how are you then monitoring the effectiveness of everything that you do, given how much you're investing in it? And finally is to report and communicate. How are you reporting and communicating on all these different efforts in a way that, like I said, that is truthful, that is transparent, but also that makes sense within the different audiences? How do you communicate on your product packaging versus on your website, versus to the people who might invest in your business, versus your suppliers? And of course, a part of the reporting is also linked to what you should submit to comply with different laws, like the UK Modern Slavery Act, the UK Plastics Packaging Tax, and for example, other European laws such as the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act or the Norway Transparency Act. Finally, I would like to leave you with some top tips. So we talked about what an approach can look like for business. Now, if you ask me, then what should we do right now, right? It sounds really nice in theory, all these things, but I guess what I want to leave you with is just some clear guidance of things you can do right now to embed sustainability in your business, into your day-to-day life and operations. And we understand there's so many challenges and pressures for businesses, and that's why we want to make this as simple as possible. And before I get into the top tips, I just want to acknowledge that we understand businesses have very different maturity levels when it comes to sustainability. Some are much more far ahead in their journey, others are just starting out, but whatever you are, it's all about taking some small steps. So the first thing I would like the top tip that we have is just understanding where you are in the journey. This means learning from your peers. Look around. What are they doing? Where are you at the moment? Where do you want to be? And then maybe seek help and seek support from those who might be able to provide free resources, free support to support with getting started. The second top tip is then starting with the top. Before you go and demand things from the people you work with you, before you make claims on your website, before you put on price tags on your product labeling, any claims or whatever it is, just make sure that inside of your organization and coming from the top, you have some clear, like a strategy and some clear policies, right? You have some policies that say, for example, how you want to work, how you work with your suppliers, what the expectations are for the people who work with you. For example, that you have zero tolerance to child labor. And you might think it's ridiculous that we still have to set some of these standards today. But the truth is, it's still happening. And a report that SEDEX released last year, in 100,000 audits, we found there's actually a huge percentage of them had indicators of forced labor. This is around the world, and this includes the UK as well. Because the risk of things such as child labor and forced labor are virtually existent in every country in the world, and it will affect businesses in a way or another, more direct or indirectly. So start with the top, start inwards, and then work your way out. Then the third top tip is to build visibility. We understand for a small business, we can't tell you, go to raw material level within the next 3 months. That's impossible. So what should you do? You start mapping out who your direct suppliers are in the first year, so the most immediate suppliers. But something to keep in mind is also your indirect suppliers. Your indirect suppliers are those who are relating to your logistics, transport, and this is something that we are seeing more and more, that a lot of these laws, a lot of the due diligence large companies will have to do if they work with you, is to provide information on some of these issues. So this is something to keep in mind. The product is not just the material that you source, the product that comes to you. It's also the way it's transported, the way it comes to you. Is via sea, is via air? You know, what is, in this case, would be what are the implications in terms of pollution and emissions from your own product? The fourth thing will be identifying risks, environmental and human rights risks. We discussed how we could do this. A way to do this is start by understanding there's many resources online, like the Global Slavery Index, which I had the pleasure to work towards the next round that we will publish this year. And what, for example, resources like this tell you is what are the highest risk countries. And organizations like SEDEX and many other providers can also support you in identifying the highest risk countries, regions, and commodities. The fifth top tip I have for businesses is enhancing the worker voice. Obviously, everything we do must include the voice and center the interests of those who produce and make the goods that we sell, the goods that we manufacture, and the goods that are linked to and products linked to our business and services. So enhancing the worker voice can happen through several ways. This essentially means having a feedback mechanism or way for people to report any concerns or issues they might have. So this can be through a whistleblowing mechanism, like a hotline, an email address, having an appointed person in the organization that you can say, if we have any sustainability concerns related to what you're doing, who is the person we go to report them? And maybe also make this available, if you want, to your own customers as well. So just having that point of contact is just so important, having a process. And the final top tip, I would say, is just to measure. Just measure everything you do. It's just so important to keep documentation of the things you're doing. Sometimes I know as a small business, with the day-to-day pressure and all how busy you are, we forget to document things. But documenting and formalizing procedures and what we're doing will go a long way in the future and the medium long term. And so measuring what you're doing, having like a baseline, for example, this year, this is how much we use in terms of water, this is how much discharge we had of water or the chemicals. Next year, we'll aim to reduce 5%, 10%, and then check if you achieved it. And that also helps you to be motivated in your sustainability journey. Before we get into the questions, I want to leave you with just share some resources that we have. As I mentioned, SEDEX members are part of a big community, but we also have free resources for everyone. So we have, for example, a EU guide for businesses of all sizes, including SMEs and large companies, about what the EU Corporate Sustainability Directive means, and many other laws. We also have an article recently about the UK's plastics packaging tax, and what you can do right now to prepare for it, and if you might be affected by it or not. As we understand, the UK plastics packaging tax will have a huge impact on retailers. And another resource is around supply chain disruption. So all this content is available for free on our website, zx.com. Now, before I open the floor for questions, and I really would like to encourage just some free discussion. Just because I'm up here does not mean anything. Love to hear from you about challenges, if you're having any comments. But before that, I just want to say that our SEDEX colleagues are here for the entire duration of the fair. And you can find them at Hall 19, where we are at E56, so just around the corner, essentially. Yeah. So, should we get started with some questions? I think there's a mic that can go around if people want to ask anything or have any comments. I'll just give a few minutes. If you don't want to ask now, you can always find our colleagues later on and ask any questions about, yeah, amazing. Great. Of course, anyone can ask questions, yes. Questions, comments, let's have a conversation, please.
Okay. I'm Romil, and my question is, I know a bit about SEDEX, and yes, it is a very good practice to bring some, best practices around how you produce, what environment you give to our people and all. But as far as adoption goes, the biggest challenge we small producers have is the costing on that. So, we don't mind getting ourselves prepared for it, but at the same time, when things like COVID stuck and you are actually facing a lot of trouble in your business, and then you have the SEDEX certification costing, which is sometimes a big overhead for smaller companies like us. Is there a process, or is there a way your company is going to come up with a solution wherein it can be adapted for smaller businesses? Because right now the whole regulation is around a big producer, a big company, but say a pocket industry which doesn't have to have all that, but still can apply for SEDEX. So that was the thing.
Sure, thank you. That's a fantastic question. The first thing I want to go back to is SEDEX has suppliers in the name. It's all about small companies. I know I said this and I showed you the slide with the big company. So anyway, but I want to address this. Recently, I'm going to answer through an example. I worked with, so this company was a supplier. They were a dairy company who worked with a big UK supermarket, which I'm not going to name. And what they wanted was, they said, well, we are a small supplier. We're going to be audited soon. How can we make sure we have the best sustainability practices? Because we want to be a really good supplier to this customer, and we want to grow with them. And we know that being a supplier to one of the huge UK retailers, it's life-changing for a business. They can represent something like 70 to 80% of all your revenue, right? So how can you be in the best shape possible, but knowing that you have limited money and budget for these things, right? Because you have so many other costs, like you mentioned. And what is SEDEX doing about this? What we did with them was, first of all, we did an assessment with them to understand what they were currently doing and how we can get them in shape in terms of responsible sourcing. So what were good practices? What were some quick wins for them as well? It's not just about implementing a huge program from scratch that will cost thousands of pounds. It's about understanding what your quick wins are as a business. What kind of things can you already capitalize on, essentially? And then from that we said, okay, so they currently pay the SEDEX supplier membership price, which is around, I think, £100 per year. £100 to have access to a community of learning and and as a customer requirement and all the other SEDEX benefits. I know it's still £100, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that unreasonable. And also, please know, SEDEX has not increased prices in many, many, many years, because we have suppliers in India, China, Brazil, and UK. We don't want to drive anyone bankrupt so they can start a responsible sourcing journey, so they lose customers, so they don't work with the big retailers, right? So, but getting to your question, what we did with this brand was, with this supplier was, realistically, this is how much time and how much money it would cost you to then, let's say, upgrade your SEDEX membership to have all these things and tools that these big companies have on the platform. Said, well, we're not quite there yet. We're still growing. We've grown a lot during the pandemic. We have limited money. What should we do? And we just help them with a small action plan. This is the quick win. This is what you can do right now. You don't have to aim for everything. You don't have to have a full program. You don't have to use SEDEX membership. You don't have to have hundreds of suppliers to make use of something like SEDEX or other provider. There are so many providers out there. It's all about where you start. And I think for SEDEX, for us, is just being mindful of those costs, keeping those as low as possible, trying to offer more and more advantages to be a member. So in this case, our community is something that obviously we focus on big businesses, but now we also have a lot of programs with in different languages from suppliers for suppliers around the world, because we know sometimes in a lot of these conversations about sustainability, it's all just for the big companies. So there's something else we do. So offering more value for money in terms of a membership. And I'm not trying to turn this into a sales pitch, but I think what you asked is very relevant, because the small businesses, you are the ones who make the big retailers. You're the core of. You are the proximity to the customers, to the local communities, and you will feel environmental impacts before the big retailers feel. So how can we make sure that whatever sustainability looks like for you is something that is affordable, that is accessible? And I guess the way to do that is making sure that providers like SEDEX offer good value for money, keep the cost down, and make sure that there's ways to support you with free resources, training, for example. And SEDEX, we have a lot of training as well. And then you truly engage with companies of similar sizes to learn. I think that's just one of the best things. I don't know if they answer your question. Obviously, there's many other conversations we can have around what we're doing, but mm. So, okay. Okay. Of course. So I think there's just one difference here, which is SEDEX, just to confirm. So what SEDEX does is we have also an audit methodology called the SMETA methodology. And the SMETA methodology assesses working conditions and environmental conditions across different sites. We don't do a certification. We have a methodology. And what happens is SMETA is probably the most used social audit methodology in the world. But we don't charge to use it. What we do is SMETA audits are such SMETA audits must be conducted by the third party, an independent third party, and obviously independent auditors will charge money, right? So that's what you can say. Maybe they'll charge around, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000. I don't know. Well, it will depend on the providers, and we have a list of providers you can choose from, right? But that is to conduct one audit. That's not to be part of SEDEX. And audit is to just assess your working conditions. It's not something you have to do very regularly. But obviously, we understand that if providers are charging a very high amount, and then exactly, yeah, yeah. What I would say is as well is you ask. So let's say I'm part of SEDEX. My company, which is a big company, a big retailer, produces the same table as you, and we both have certifications. The certification doesn't tell you it's sustainable. It will just tell you SEDEX is not a certification. But if we both have the same type of audit done, it will just say that we both meet some standards, the same international standards in terms of human rights, labor rights, health and safety, environment, and business ethics around corruption. That's all it will say. It won't say my product is better than yours. It will say we both abide by the same standard to make sure that no one was exploited, no one was harmed, and we've not, we abide by the same standards in a sense, right? The same principles and values, rule book, right? Yeah. But so how do you this is a great question. How do you make sure your product is different? If let's say we see so many brands with different certifications, like with or different carbon offsetting schemes or being recycled, but how in a market that is getting overloaded with different sustainability claims, how do you make sure that your product stands out, right? I think that's a different conversation to have, and I think you need to think you're a small producer, and in that case, you need to say, well, we are a small producer. We support our communities. These are some of our benefits.
No, my thing was not to differentiate the product,
Okay.
but to differentiate when I mean, my question was, again, based on the pricing, which you clarified. My question essentially meant that I was stuck on that £100 thing which you said. So you said that a small producer can take that SEDEX for £100 and get those resources and all, wherein from where I have learned my SEDEX, they charge like 3,500 to £4,000. So I was thinking, what's that gap? What's that gap where I can even have a £100 thing? They are taking it for £5,000. So is their SEDEX something special than my SEDEX certification? That was my question, which was eventually answered by you.
Yeah.
That it's the same.
around
It's
the
the
world.
same thing. Yeah.
It's the same standard around the world, and we try
Okay.
to make it as cheap as
Okay.
possible. To be honest with you, something we are aware of, and maybe I'll just mention, is we know there's also copycats and fraud schemes, and something we are aware of. Companies claiming to be charging or doing the SEDEX SMETA audit, but they are not official providers. That also happens. Yeah, so we are completely aware of this, but I think this is an important question. Should we
Thank you
just
so
move on
much.
to the other questions?
Thank you so much. Yep.
I just thought you mentioned a really good point about certification and how in a world where it is so saturated with lots of different kind of certifications, and how you know which one to kind of accept and go for, because I think if you start promoting it, like you said, to your customers, so we buy a lot from wholesalers with ready-made products that have used, I don't know, however many factories across the world. How do you then say to your customers, we've abided by this standard, when they might have used, or the certificates might be so different? And I sort of thought that greenwashing point was quite, you don't want to then be called out later by somebody saying, oh, actually that wasn't as high a standard as that person used.
That is a really, really great question. To be honest with you, it's a difficult one, because you as a brand, let's say you are buying from wholesalers, and then you say, they tell you, we have the certification, we've done all the steps, and you think, other brands have it as well, we trust it, right? And then when you have greenwashing claims saying, actually, it's a bit wishy-washy, they don't really do full due diligence, some carbon offsetting schemes, sometimes just for transport, there's no link to anything else in the supply chain, for example. So it's difficult. Brands have to trust something that maybe they're not quite fully understand, right? Because you don't have to do their job for them. I mean, they're supposed to be making your life a bit easier. And with so many certifications, what do you think? I guess the question here is that I get to a lot of times with speaking with different companies is, what is the best certification? What is the one that I can trust, that will be the best product, that won't have any issues? And it's just, there isn't a right answer, but they are held accountable. For example, the Hague Index, for example, recently was on the news because of the methodology and some of the background behind the index wasn't really assessing fully sustainability, the holistic approach, and the brands using that index were called out. And that's really horrible for brands, suddenly to feel like you've trusted someone with the certification. You're paying more for it as well. You think about everything that is organic or eco something, has to have an extra price attached to it sometimes. I guess there is no right answer here, but to just do your own due diligence. Check, okay, so compared to other certification or the other one, what is the difference? I've read an article about different certifications. What is the advantage between yours and the other one? The one they're using. Why are you using this one and not the other one? Is it because it's cheaper? Is it because you already are working with them? Is it because you measure all the things that they're not measuring? So just be critical and ask questions yourself as a business. And then I guess look at your peers. What are your peers doing? And I say peers are not competitors for a reason, which is there'll always be ways to differentiate your product and for you to get a competitive advantage. But in sustainability, we kind of need to work together and learn from each other. The first thing I do when I'm working with a small brand that tells me, we want to get the best certification. What do? We say, let's look at what your peers are doing. And let's see, and then let's look at the most used ones, the most common ones for your business, let's say, what are those? How do they work? Let's try to understand how those schemes work. For example, we see a lot of businesses jumping on the carbon offsetting bandwagon. Are you just there to plant trees without thinking about the other environmental implications of your product? Or are you there to doing carbon offsetting, knowing fully what the environmental impact of what you do is? You know, so it's kind of the approach. It's just very difficult, but it's just a great question, honestly. And I think it's about you as a business doing that due diligence as well. In the end of the day, they are your supplier as well. So this expectations you set for yourself and you set for others, it's something that you need to be clear of. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Great, yeah, sorry. Just getting some.
Hello.
Hi.
Rather a comment or something to add. I'm working for FRAS. We are a textile manufacturer for scarves. And we have, for example, SMETA audit and other certificates. And we are getting asked by our big customers to supply the certificates which we get from the audits. So that's probably what you're talking about. Even a small independent retailer can ask the supplier or even the wholesaler for these certificates. And I really urge you to do that, to make a difference between somebody only having a claim, like it's made from recycled PET bottles, that's all they claim, and you don't know whether it's true or not. But if you get a certification which is proving social standards like SMETA, or we also have GRS for global recycled standard, you do your due diligence, I think, by asking for this kind of certificates, even as a small independent retailer or a smaller shop. So that would be my recommendation, and I think that's the way we have to drive the industry, to ask, even for a small customer, for these kind of certificates, to get it to a certain standard. And well, the question, the gentleman from India, I understand it's somehow easier for a bigger supplier, but there should be also ways for smaller suppliers to have it at an affordable level if they're really following the standards.
Absolutely. And something happened recently. I was just thinking about this. Is I was working with a small retailer, and they were saying, and they produce desserts, and they produce desserts in Australia, and they were saying, I was saying, well, ideally you should have all your suppliers audited. And they're like, well, we're family business, we're still growing, we don't have money to be demanding, but also, do you really think we can demand that from our suppliers? And I said, yes, you should. That's the ideal world, but. He's like, oh, but the people that we work with are vanilla bean supplier is a family business in Madagascar. We source from them directly. If we ask them for an audit, we can't. They can't spend £1,000, £2,000 on an audit right now. So what are other alternative ways we can ensure we work with people who are ethical and who source responsibly? So there's other ways. Obviously, the audit is still a great tool. It needs to be complemented by other things. It's the same as you having a great tool, but in an environment where there's no accountability, right? Or everything needs to exist within a structure where if you find issues, it's because you want to address them. But let's say you're working with small suppliers, and they say, well, we don't have an audit in place, we don't have the certification, but we want to do something. So there's other ways to engage with them. For example, you can do your own visits to the suppliers if you can. You can have regular conversations with them, trying to be honest about what are some of the struggles they are having, or setting some goals for themselves as well. And in that case, for the Vanilla Bean Madagascar supplier, what they do is they have monthly calls with suppliers to talk about things. So just to have an open approach to say, we're not going to stop working with you suddenly. And notice, this is a small supplier, a dessert company who sells to a huge retailer, right? But then for this small vanilla bean supplier, this dessert company is 80 or 90% of all the revenue. If they lose them, they go out of business, right? So what can I do? So they have this ongoing proactive conversations and engagement to say, and actually they are now investing in the supplier as well. They say, well, we have extra money, extra budget, and we know you're an important strategic supplier to us. We'll help you with, for example, improving the conditions in your factory. We can pay you a bit more to make sure you stay with us, but also you start to commit to some of these things. So they're just different things you can do. It doesn't have to look the same, but there's obviously some standards that are more expected and more recognized, right? The SMETA audit, for example, is known amongst a lot of suppliers, but that shouldn't be the only reason why, if you can't do it or if you're not doing it, that you can't be sustainable. That would be ridiculous. There's many steps you can do right now. That's kind of the point. All right. Are there any other questions? I know we're getting to the end of our time. It's difficult to be up here. It's very hot. Is there any other question, comment, anything? If not, then our CEDEX colleagues are here on site today. My colleague Mo is here as well today. And we're just around the corner, stall. It's E56. So just just come by, talk to us, whatever any questions you have. If you want to receive a copy of the presentation, we're happy to send it to you. Just come just speak to myself and my colleague Mo. We'll send you a copy of everything, and we can provide further information. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your questions.